And then we have this situation where China is claiming that it's beaten the virus. Mission accomplished? Question mark. Chinese president declares victory over coronavirus in visit to Wuhan. Um, Almost exactly 1 month ago, the Chinese president, clad in a face mask and protective gear, ventured out of the imperial city and out into the Beijing neighborhoods where he visited with hospital workers and posed for photos and for the state-run media. Um, Looking back, the story says, his decision to show up in person and visit with doctors and nurses probably accomplished what he intended. It gave the Chinese people hope that the leadership had not forgotten them, and that while the quarantine measures might seem draconian and over punitive at times, the Communist Party would continue to do what it feels it must maintain to maintain social order and protect the Chinese people. And we're seeing the same kind of psychological process where I know what we're doing seems extreme, but we're doing it to protect the people. 1 month later, the Chinese president is making his second major public visit since the outbreak began in late December. Actually, it began earlier. They never told anybody about it. According to the author of a book about China, I think it's called The Bully of Asia, the Chinese government locked down its military in Wuhan long before, because of the virus, long before it told the Chinese people that there was a virus. So anyway, this time he's traveling to Wuhan, the epicenter of the outbreak, it says, in what appears to be a mission accomplished moment for the leader of the world's largest country in its battle against the coronavirus, COVID-19. Since the beginning of the outbreak, the president has left the on-the-ground work to his number two. And on Tuesday, while Chinese state media touted the visit as a sign that victory is near, the president stopped at one of two hastily built hospitals, quarantine center operations. You may have seen them being built in ridiculously short time. Built in under actually 2 weeks, it says here, between January and February, during the worst of the outbreak in Wuhan. So the Chinese are saying that they have they're coming to the point where they're claiming that they have overcome this virus. And one commentator said a victory in Wuhan is a victory for China, and the whole feel of the reporting and the statements is that China has overcome the virus. And interestingly, this syncs with something I have mentioned before in that video with Gareth 2 weeks ago, and that is a Rockefeller Foundation document from 2010, which kind of went through a series of so-called scenarios or simulations of what would happen in various situations. And one of their scenarios was a pandemic of a flu-like virus. And they talk about what the reactions will be and the measures that would be taken by governments. And going back to what I was talking about earlier, they praise the Chinese government in this scenario for its, in effect, authoritarian response, because they say that in this flu virus scenario situation, that this meant the Chinese government was successful in overcoming the virus. Whereas Um, at first, uh, Western countries, Western quote democracies, didn't respond in that way, and therefore the virus spread and became more uh, more widespread than it would otherwise have been if they'd have taken the actions of China. I've got the document here. Find a quote here. Um, the United States' initial policy, this is the scenario they describe, of strongly discouraging citizens from flying proved deadly in its leniency, accelerating the spread of the virus not just within the US, but across borders. However, a few countries did fare better, China in particular. The Chinese government's quick imposition and enforcement of mandatory quarantine for all citizens, as well as its instant and near hermetic sealing off of all borders, saved millions of lives, stopping the spread of the virus far earlier than in other countries and enabling a swifter post pandemic recovery. And so, what is the underlying theme of that description? Chinese Communist Party non-democratic authoritarian response was more successful than a democratic uh, we can't impose this on the people too early West. But it goes on. China's government was not the only one that took extreme measures to protect its citizens from the risk and exposure during the pandemic. And of course, the World Health Organization, led by this deeply corrupt guy, Tedros, from Ethiopia, um, has now declared coronavirus to be a global pandemic. Now, that was the most predictable thing you'll ever hear. It was going to be that from the start. The World Health Organization is controlled by the cult and was created by the cult to control and dominate global policy on health through the big pharma cartel that is also owned by the cult. China's government was not the only one that took extreme measures to protect its citizens from risk and exposure during the pandemic. National leaders around the world flexed their authority and imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from mandatory wearing of face masks, which are next to useless, by the way, um, and to body temperature checks at the entries to communal spaces like train stations and supermarkets. Even after here's the point. Even after the pandemic faded, the more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified. In order to protect themselves from the spread of increasingly global problems, from pandemics to international terrorism, environmental crises, and rising poverty, leaders around the world took a firmer grip on power. So you can see this is in 2010. The Rockefeller Foundation is completely cult controlled. Rockefeller family inner core, at least, is are absolute cult assets, and were involved in the creation of the World Health Organization. So then we come to South Korea, Singapore as well. Singapore and South Korea numbers suggest coronavirus can be controlled. Numbers out of Singapore, South Korea, and even China, which show cases leveling off and declining, suggest that coronavirus can be controlled without millions of people in the West becoming infected. Despite widespread panic buying and a financial market collapse, figures from these three countries suggest that COVID-19 can be successfully combated if the right measures are taken. According to the country's health minister, South Korea has passed the peak of coronavirus infections and is now seeing a decline in cases. Despite suffering more than 7,300 coronavirus infections and 50 deaths, cases in recent days are on the downturn. 448 new cases were recorded in March, 7,272 cases on March the 3rd, March the 8th rather, and 165 cases on March the 9th. And it seems that this virus has, like I said earlier, different strains in different places. Here's a story, because one of the kind of prominent things we should be also focusing on in terms of who benefits is the fact that this virus absolutely overwhelmingly kills old people. And the older people are, the more likely that they are to die from it. Whereas in other places, younger people, it's basically nothing. And of course, as I've said in the books for decades, there is a plan to target old people, which they don't really want around this cult because they are of no benefit to them, because they're psychopaths. But anyway, here's a story out of China. Chinese grandmother, 103, recovers from coronavirus after being treated for less than a week. A 103-year-old grandmother has recovered from the coronavirus following 6 days of treatment in Wuhan. She was discharged from hospital yesterday afternoon, it says. She is so far the oldest coronavirus patient to recover in China and 2 years older than the previous record holder, who was 101. Ms. Zhang was cured within less than a week because she did not have many underlying health conditions, her doctor told the local press. A video shows the former patient being escorted out of the hospital by a group of medical workers. So it's this virus is not a freaking death sentence. Nothing like. And it's not just old people. It is old people and others, but mainly old people with other health conditions, which make their body immune system less able to deal with it. But like I say, it does seem that there are different strains of this. You see, again, you look not only at who benefits, but you start to look at the patterns of coincidence. So Iran, of all the countries in all the world, has been very badly hit by this compared with other countries outside of China. And a number, more than a number, of its regime officials, etc., have died from it. And Iran just happens to be permanently in the gun sights of the United States and Israel, brackets, same thing. And I can't see that as a coincidence. And then there's Italy, where, again, they've been extremely badly hit compared with other countries outside of China. And for reasons it would take a long time to go into now, Italy and Rome is actually a target of this cult, because the Roman Church and the Vatican has been a vehicle for this cult, but it's just uses vehicles that suit it while it suits it. And when eventually you move to the next stage of this global control system, then things that were good for you before and vehicles for you before now becomes more expedient to the outcome you want to actually target. So all I say is that it's not a surprise that Italy um, is being hit by this more than other countries currently. And what they've been doing is reacting by putting the whole country in a form of lockdown. Public gatherings have been banned, sports events and football matches have been suspended, and movement is being severely restricted. And people have been frantically buying up food and other things at supermarkets after the announcement in the Italian media. And we have now reached the point, as I'm speaking today, where Italy is to shutter all businesses besides pharmacies and grocery stores as coronavirus outbreak continues to spread. Italy will cut down most or shut down most businesses across the country amid the fast spreading coronavirus outbreak. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte said, leaving only pharmacies, food markets, and certain essential factories open. Bars, hair salons, restaurants, all other businesses not necessary for production will be forced to close. Conte said in a televised address, the move comes as Rome steps up containment measures to combat the spread of the coronavirus. It calls it lethal. Well, obviously, it's not lethal because of the numbers that don't die, which are the vast majority, but obviously some do, including nationwide travel restrictions. Um, and Italy saw its deadliest day yet for the outbreak on Wednesday, with 196 people who died, an increase of over 30%, bringing the total in the country to 827, with nearly 12,000 500 confirmed cases. Over 2,000 new infections were reported in the last 24 hours. Um, and for my own reasons, because I've been researching this for 30 years, I am not in the least surprised that Italy is getting this, like Iran at the moment, worse than other countries outside of out of China. We've also had Tom Hanks, the actor, of course, who has announced that he and his wife have tested positive for coronavirus while they're in Australia. He's been filming there on the Gold Coast. Um, Oscar winning actor Tom Hanks has revealed that he and his wife, Rita Wilson, have tested positive for the new coronavirus in Australia. Hanks and Wilson, both 63, sought medical advice after experiencing symptoms of a cold in Queensland. The actor wrote on Instagram. They will now spend time in isolation. And they were on the Gold Coast while he was filming, the story says. And Hanks wrote on Instagram, we felt a bit tired, like we had colds and some body aches. Rita had some chills that came and went, slight fevers too. To play things right, as is needed in the world right now, we were tested for coronavirus and were found to be positive. So what he's describing is not two people who have been struck down by a virus that's absolutely incapacitated them. So people are dying from this, yes, but we still have to keep this into some kind of perspective in terms of the numbers and the age of those overwhelmingly involved. Um, I mean, I'm coming up 68, so oh, um, I should be. Oh my God, but I'm not because there's no point. It is what it is, and you deal with it as it is. So, oh yeah, Bill Gates. Bill Gates. You can't have a crisis without Bill Gates Gates-funded program will soon offer home testing kits for new coronavirus. Well, that's an amazing. Don't they move quick? Testing for the coronavirus in Seattle, in the Seattle area, and they want to move this nationwide in America, will get a huge boost in the coming weeks as a project funded by Bill Gates and his foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. If you want a list of cult desires, then just look at the funding history of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So this project funded by him begins offering home testing kits that will allow people who fear they may be infected to swab their noses and send the samples back for analysis. Results, which should be available in 1 to 2 days, will be shared with local health authorities and who will notify those who test positive. Via online forms, infected people can answer questions about their movements and contacts, making it easier for health officials to locate others who may need to be tested or quarantined, as well as to track the virus's spread and identify possible hotspots. So the goal is to eventually be able to process thousands of tests a day, said Scott Dowell, leader of coronavirus response at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The project was ramping up as quickly as possible. You do surprise me. But it's not clear exactly when it will launch. Among other things, software needs to be upgraded to handle the expected crush of requests and a detailed questionnaire finalized for people who request tests. Now, this is the same Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you might remember if you've been following these podcasts or seen it elsewhere, that with the World Economic Forum, this 1% elite of the elite that meet at Davos in Switzerland every year, those two were running this simulation 6 weeks before the outbreak became publicly known into the response to a coronavirus outbreak. And of course, Bill Gates and his foundation are utterly obsessed with vaccinating everything that moves on Earth. And a vaccine's going to come along eventually, which there will be pressure for everyone to have. And these are coincidences? I don't think so. One of the other kind of major consequences of this is going to be economic. Like I've been saying since 2008 and that crash, this cult is planning a massive global crash. Now, this, as we speak, this coronavirus situation has great potential to create that very crash. I mean, when you're closing down businesses and saying you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't operate, your factory's going to close, your shop's going to close, whatever. Well, so many businesses, particularly smaller businesses, by the way, which the cult wants rid of, so everything's controlled by its corporations, they are often running from week to week or month to month as it is. So now you're going to shut them off. And what about their employees? Are they going to get paid? And if they're going to get paid, where are you going to get the money from if you're not selling anything? So the potential, the box ticking of this virus situation against all the things that this cult wants for the world are just incredibly synchronistic. It does tick every box. We're looking at another thing is they want to reduce and control global travel, not even global travel, national travel. This move to autonomous cars is about a computer, which they control, deciding where you can go and where you can't go. And this is already devastating for global airlines.